Welcome to How to Get Good at Fingerstyle Blues Part 3. Whether you're at that stage where you're just trying to get your right hand to do what it's supposed to do, or you're at the point where you're trying to figure out how you can play more complete songs and make them your own, you're in the right place. My name is David Hamburger. I've been teaching fingerstyle blues guitar for more than 25 years as a writer for acoustic guitar and guitar player, as a video host for TrueFire and Homespun, and of course here online for nearly 10 years now. This is the third lesson in this 3-part masterclass, and if you enjoyed the first 2 parts of it, I think you're really going to love what we're going to talk about today. Now, if you missed either of those first 2 videos, I'll put some links to them down below so you can go and check them out. In the first one, I went over a step-by-step process for getting your right hand to do what you want it to do, taking apart the thumb and the fingers, putting them back together, making sure your groove is all lined up and solid. A really foundational skill no matter what level you're at. And in the second lesson, I went over how to turn a 12-bar blues into a complete song, how to come up with your own vamps that you can use as intros and endings and for contrast in the middle. Also really important if you want to have a repertoire of songs that you can play that sound complete and are performance ready. So I want you to get the most out of today's lesson, so if you missed either of those 2 lessons, go back and check them out. I will be here waiting. Now, if you've already been through the first 2 videos and you're ready to go, in today's lesson, we are going to solve the problem of improvisation. Being able to improvise, being able to add blues licks to your arrangements, being able to come up with your own licks and add them into your intros and outros. This is a big part of making this music your own, not just feeling like you're playing by rote or going through someone else's stuff note for note. It's a really big part of making this music feel more enjoyable and more expressive. But I do realize that improvising is possibly the most intimidating topic when it comes to fingerstyle blues. So even though it's really helpful part of personalizing this music, it also feels like, oh, it's this huge mountain to climb, and how are you going to do that? Now you will be shocked to hear that just like with right hand technique and arranging tunes, when it comes to improvisation, what I want to suggest is that you work through a simple step-by-step plan for adding this skill into your playing. When you can add blues licks to your arrangements, when you can improvise and come up with your own licks for an intro or an outro, that is a big part of being able to express yourself when you play this kind of music. So, fingerstyle blues is often learned as a kind of rote, this is how it goes, let's wind it up and learn this tab note for note. That's certainly how I learned a lot of things, maybe how you've learned some things too. And it always felt like, to me, like, well, how come that's blues, but it doesn't feel like, oh, I'm soloing on the blues, right? Like that, when you're playing with a band and all you have to do is play the notes on top, that feels expressive, that feels emotional. But playing fingerstyle blues feels kind of like, oh, I got to get it all right, and there's no room to kind of open it up. But there is no reason why you can't learn how to put licks Why can't you put licks like that over a steady bass? That's improvising. And I want to show you the basis of doing that today. You can practice improvising and develop it as a skill, just like anything else you do on the guitar. And I realize practicing improvisation, that sounds like an oxymoron. But all that means is that instead of just kind of winging it, you go through a few simple steps along the way to get the licks and the skills and the idea into your hands and into your ears so you know what you're doing, and it's something you can do on any song when you want to, the way you want to do it. Now, in the last lesson, I talked about how to come up with your own vamp for a straight eighths steady bass tune like Pony Blues, and the vamp that we did was this one. just a simple 4-bar idea that you can use to set up the tune as an intro, to provide some contrast in the middle of the tune, to have an outro at the end. And this particular vamp is made up of some little riffs, right? Now going back to the idea in the first lesson of looking at the phrasing, we can break this down into 4 phrases. There's my pickup phrase, right? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. And then it's answered by this little short lick here. And then that whole thing is answered by that. So again, we can break it up into this pickup phrase, this short answer, and then this conclusion. That all makes a kind of call and response. And then that lick gets repeated, but with a variation at the end. And then finally. And so this last one, we're going to grab that one and find some ways to change up that lick. Because that lick is the one that's providing the most contrast. It comes at the end of the 4 bars, and it's the one where we change register and we land on the root an octave down. So what we're going to do first is consider that spot. We're going to call that the pocket of opportunity, right? That's the little spot in the vamp where we have a chance to do something different. And that something different we're going to do is swap in different licks. So this is our pocket of opportunity. 1, 2, 3. So now we're not trying to improvise over a whole vamp or a whole chorus of blues. We're just trying to improvise in our little pocket of opportunity, which cuts the whole thing down to size in a really nice way. Now, the lick that was there has a particular shape to it. I think of that as the rhythmic contour of the lick. This is just like in the first lesson, we were looking at the phrasing of the melody of the tune. What's the phrasing of the lick that we're trying to replace? That's the rhythm of those 5 notes. And 1 and 2 and. So that's the rhythmic contour of the line. Da, 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 da. So our next step is to come up with some licks that follow that same rhythmic contour so that we know that it will fit in that same spot. And that way we will have different moves that we can swap in. And that will be the beginning of our improvisation. We can use the original lick we're replacing as a model for what kind of licks to come up with. And if we look at this lick, we have kind of 3 rules for how to replace this lick. The first one is the rhythmic rule, right? The idea that it's going to follow the same rhythmic contour like we just talked about. The second one is that, well, seems to be a minor pentatonic lick, an E minor pentatonic lick. So let's stick to the E minor pentatonic scale. And then finally, it seems to land on the root. So let's have our replacement licks land on the root as well. And we could maybe add one other idea into the mix, which is, well, the vamp is mostly in this register, and this ending lick is lower, which provides some contrast. So maybe we also try to find some other licks that resolve down in this register, or maybe we go above and see if we can find some things up there. So for instance, we could maybe try something like this. So that follows all the rules. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 4 and 3 and 4, right? So it's following the rhythmic contour of, it starts on the and of 4, it ends on the and of 2. It's in the minor pentatonic scale. Actually, it's the E blues scale because it has in this flat 5, but who's counting? It lands on the root, and it lands in a different register than the top 2 strings, like the vamp is doing. So we could have that one. Another one we could try is this one here, starting on the 5th and landing on the root, and the time would be 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4. So that follows all the rules as well. And then maybe we could try that one. So going to the root up here, and the 6, and the flat 3, and the root, and then the root again, but on the 5th string. So that gets above the register of the vamp, even though it ends up on the root that is in the same register. So 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4. So all 3 of those licks could be swapped in because they share the same rhythmic contour as the original lick, and they are in the same scale, and they resolve to the same root. So here's what it would sound like to swap those in. There's the original one. There's another one. That. Now the cool thing is we can work on each lick using the exact same tools that I talked about in the first lesson in the workshop about how to learn the melody to a tune. Each one of these licks is just a little melody. And so for each lick, say that one, well, it's being played over a bass. So to separate out the bass, we know it's just a steady bass. So you can just make sure the thumb knows what it's doing. And then you can look at the lick itself and its phrasing, which starts on the and of 4 and ends on the and of 2. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And then you can put it back together knowing the thumb is playing on all of the downbeats on the 1, 2, 3, and 4. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And you can work out each of the licks that way until you know that you have each one working over the bass. And then it's time to start improvising. So as you go through the vamp, each time you get to that pocket of opportunity, you get to decide on the fly which one of these licks you're going to drop in. Like that. So if you found the idea of improvising kind of intimidating or overwhelming in the past, I hope this 3-step process makes you feel like there's a way you could start to add improvising into your own playing. Look for that pocket of opportunity, work out the rhythmic contour, come up with some licks that you can swap in on your own, and you'll be on your way. Now, if there's a part of you that's still going, not going to happen for me, let me tell you about a few online students of mine who felt the same way until they started working through some of these ideas. First, there was Anton. Now, Anton was already a very accomplished guitar player, but by his own description had not played a lot of blues. And he said, "I've tried to steal a few single note licks here and there, and it's tough. Thanks for coming up with a good way to teach improvisation. I'm working through the licks for Matchbox Blues, and breaking things down like this is really great. An easier way to learn this stuff. Then there was Steven, who said, nobody's fault but mine was very easy to learn and really rocks. I actually composed my own solo, which was a watershed for me. I'd never done anything like that before. This method must work if a knuckle-dragging guitarist like me can learn to do it. And finally, there was Bob, who said, I've been playing guitar for more years than I can count, but I'm finally beginning to understand what I'm doing. I used to think I just wasn't wired for improvisation, but it turns out I just never had a good teacher. So if these people can do it, you can too. But let's talk about one thing for a second, which is a lot of times people will say, well, did the great pre-war bluesmen sit around practicing improvisation? Did they do exercises for their right hand technique? No, probably not. Not the way we think about it, but these were people that were exposed to this kind of music on a much more regular basis. At least the people that we hear on records are the ones who found someone to apprentice with, shadowed another musician, spent a lot of time listening to this kind of music, seeing it played, watching it. Opportunities that we don't necessarily have to see this music up close and figure out how it's done. So while this isn't necessarily how Gary Davis or Blind Blake would have gone about learning to play blues, I hope that in some way having these more methodical ways of looking at it can provide a way in that maybe you wouldn't get from just listening to the recordings. A way of saying, oh, that thing you're trying to do, here are some step-by-step things you can do to get from here to there, to get you closer to that sound that you really love and you want to be able to execute yourself. Which is why I really put a lot of thought into what topics to cover when I do this masterclass. And I really think that if you have a hands-on, stepwise way to really get in there and figure out your right-hand coordination, figure out how to make your tune sound more complete, figure out how to start improvising on those tunes, I think that can really move the needle for you as a fingerstyle guitar player. And I really enjoy all the comments and the questions and having some back and forth because, let's face it, playing fingerstyle guitar is a kind of isolated activity. We do it on our own. And so seeing the comments and the questions, it's kind of a microcosm of what goes on inside my ongoing online program, where there's a lot of discussion about how do we do this and how do we do that and what's the best way to work on that, and oh, you're doing it that way, I've been doing it this way, what do you think about that? And I'm not talking about me so much as this is what all the various people inside the community are talking about with each other, going back and forth about. And I always really love seeing that happen because it means that all those people now have a place to go to think about and talk about one of their favorite things and feel like there are other people who care about that too and that want to talk about it and want to get good at it as much as they do. So I think pretty carefully about what I'm going to include in one of these master classes because I want you to be able to walk away thinking, oh yeah, if I wanted to get better now, I know based on where I'm at what I should work on next and how I should work on it. But if you're like me and you want a little more detail around what should I work on first and which song should I tackle next and what's the best key to do this in, all those kind of questions, and you want to be around other people that are thinking about that too, then stick around because in the next video I will tell you more about what I'll be teaching this fall inside the Fingerstyle 5 membership and some special things that are only going to be happening right when the quarter gets started in October. So if that's something you want to know more about, keep an eye out for the very next video that I'll be doing. And since I do really love hearing from other guitar players what they're working on and how they're thinking about it, scroll down and in the comments let me know which of these ideas we've talked about you might apply first to your own playing and what song you might apply it to first. So scroll down, leave me a comment, and I'll see you in a couple of days.